Zero tolerance was interpreted as the policy that separated children from their
If I get arrested for DUI and I have a young child in the car, I'm going to be separated. When I was a police officer in New York and I arrested a father for domestic violence, I separated that father
Mr.
from his
Homan,
family.
with all due respect, legal asylees are not charged with any crime.
When you're into the country illegally, it's violation 8 United States Code 1325.
Seeking asylum is legal.
If you want to seek asylum and go through the port of entry, do it the legal way. The Attorney General of the United States has made that clear. 34 years. I saved many lives, and I ran an agency. Let's be frank in what ICE does. ICE last year took a season of opioids off the streets of this country that could have killed every man, woman, and child in the United States twice. They've arrested thousands of sexual predators that preyed on children. They rescued thousands of children who were victims of predators. They arrested hundreds of women who were victims of sex trafficking. I am proud of the agency and ICE. And what we don't want to talk about is nearly 90% of everybody ICE arrests for immigration violations either have a criminal history or are pending criminal charges when they were found. I mean, they were found in a county jail, which most likely means they weren't a choir boy. So to mismeasure what the work the men and women of ICE do is, I find appalling that a member of Congress would throw that out there like that. In my 34 years, I've never seen such hate toward a law enforcement agency in my life that you want to abolish them rather than doing your job and legislate.
Mr. Homan, your time
if they don't like
expired.
it, legislate. You can't. I
Mr.
don't think
Homan,
Congress
according
is
to
in
the rules of
habit
this committee,
of enacting laws.
Mr. Homan, your
Gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At a memorial event for David Hamburg, Speaker Pelosi and I had a chance to discuss impeachment. Mr. Dean, who wrote that?
I did.
1 month ago, May 11th, 2019, haven't we been too long in not giving Trump a meaningful moniker? Should it be deranged Don, deadbeat Don, demagogue Don? Thoughts, please, comments. Mr. Dean, who wrote that?
I assume that was mine.
It was yours. 19 days ago, May 22nd, 2019, there was this. We are witnessing Trump's massive cover-up of his criminal behavior as POTUS. He's incapable of accomplishing anything. Mr. Dean, you know who wrote that?
I suspect that was me again.
It was you. I want to focus on that last sentence. As POTUS, as President of the United States, he, Donald Trump, is incapable of accomplishing anything. When you made that statement, Mr. Dean, what did you have in mind? You thinking about the 3.2% economic growth rate we had the last quarter? Thinking about the fact we got the lowest unemployment in 50 years? How about the fact the hostages are back from North Korea? Maybe you were thinking about this. When you said the President of the United States was incapable of doing anything, were you thinking about the fact that the embassy is now in Jerusalem? I mean, I think about this one. Every single candidate for as many cycles as I can remember, Republican and Democrat, have promised the American people, you elect me, we're going to move the embassy to Jerusalem. And guess what? They get elected and they come up with a million reasons why they can't do what they said they were going to do. But this president didn't. The embassy is now in Jerusalem. So I'm just wondering, what were you thinking about when you said he's incapable of accomplishing anything?
Mr. Jordan, I think that under the parliamentary rules of the House, I'm refrained from addressing a full answer to your question.
You weren't refrained in your tweets and your comments and the things you wrote.
My tweets are not subject to the parliamentary.
They are subject to state of mind and the perspective you bring to this hearing, and I think the American people understand. Let me ask you this then. Did you give advice to Lanny Davis or Michael Cohen prior to Mr. Cohen's testimony to Congress?
No.
Well, you said on Aaron Burnett's show the night before Mr. Cohen testified in front of the Oversight Committee that Michael Cohen should, you said you had talked to Lanny Davis and that Michael Cohen should hold his testimony as long as possible from Republicans. You didn't say that to Mr. Davis? You said it on Aaron Burnett's show the night before Mr. Cohen testified.
I didn't say it directly to Mr. Cohen was your question.
No, it wasn't. My question was, did you give advice to Lanny Davis or Michael Cohen prior to Mr. Cohen's testimony to Congress?
Yeah, I have known Lanny Davis for almost a couple decades, and we have talked about it. And I did say, as soon as you turn your testimony over, it will be picked apart.
So you instructed Michael Cohen's lawyer to keep information from Republicans, to obstruct the committee work that we were doing in the Oversight Committee just a few months ago? You told that to Michael Cohen's lawyer?
I didn't quite phrase it that way, no.
You know what? They took your advice.
I'm sorry?
They took your advice.
Did they?
Yeah. Mr. Cohen kept his testimony from us for as long as possible. But you know what else Mr. Cohen did that day? Lied. Lied 7 times. And this is what I think concerns so many Americans. This is what concerns, I think, so many Americans about the work that's going on in this Congress, this 116th. The first announced witness of the 116th Congress is Michael Cohen, the guy who sits in prison today for lying to Congress. Today, Chairman Nadler brings in front of the Judiciary Committee a guy to talk about obstruction of justice who went to prison in 1974 for obstructing justice.
I did not go to prison.
Okay. You pled guilty to obstruction of justice. I'm glad you got to stay out of prison then, I guess. What bothers me the most, though, is this committee's failure to investigate how the whole Trump-Russia thing started. This is the Judiciary Committee. We're supposed to, how this whole thing began. And I said this a few weeks ago, but I want to remind this committee what the Attorney General of the United States said 8 weeks ago when he testified in front of the Senate. He said 4 important things about the beginnings of the Trump-Russia investigation. He said there was a failure of leadership at the upper echelon of the FBI. His words, not mine. Upper echelon. That's certainly true. Comey, McCabe, Baker, Strzok, Page, they've all been fired, demoted, let go, they're gone. Some of them are under investigation by the Justice Department. He said spying did occur. He said it twice. He said there's a basis for his concern about the spying that took place. And he used 2 terms that, again, I think this committee should find frightening and should be looking into. Unauthorized surveillance and political surveillance. Scary terms. So the good news is, even though this Congress has memorandums of understanding between the key committee chairmen on how they're going to coordinate their attack on the president, even though this Congress' first big witness, first big hearing, Michael Cohen, a guy who sits in prison for lying to Congress, and even though we now have a guy testifying about obstruction of justice who pled guilty to obstruction of justice, we should be looking into the things Bill Barr's looking at. Now, the good news is Mr. Durham's doing that. But this is the part I think that frustrates so many. Mr. Chairman, I would hope the Judiciary Committee and the history this committee has for protecting fundamental liberties would begin to look into those key issues, the whole premise for how this Trump-Russia investigation started in the first place. And I'll finish again with this. Emmett Flood wrote a letter to the Attorney General a few weeks back, made an important point. He said, we would all do well to remember, if they can do it to a president, imagine what they can do to you and me. Imagine what they can do to regular citizens across this great country. That should be what this committee most safeguards and most protects. And instead, we got memorandums of understanding between the chairmen. We got Michael Cohen testifying for 7 hours, getting advice from the witness here on obstructing the committee work and not sharing the information with us in a timely fashion. And now we got John Dean, 45 years ago, pled guilty to obstruction of justice, and now coming in to enlighten the Judiciary Committee on obstruction of justice when we could be going right to the start of how this whole thing started. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Before I go to the next witness, I want to point out that this committee has no memorandum of understanding with any other committee with reference to any investigations. So I don't know. I don't know. This committee has no such memorandum of understanding. I'm not aware of any others, but there may be. But this committee has no such memorandum of understanding. And number 2, since the gentleman from Ohio cast aspersions on the witness, I would remind everyone that after Mr.
No, I didn't, Mr. Chairman. I read his statements. I did not cast aspersions. I read his statements.
Very well. Since I believe the gentleman cast aspersions...
You're wrong.
Fine. Since I believe the gentleman cast aspersions on the character and truthfulness of the witness, I would remind everyone that after exhaustive testimony in 1973, when the tapes were revealed, it was revealed that everything that Mr. Dean said was correct and truthful. The next witness...
Mr. Chairman, if I could.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Rosen, 4 years ago on January 6, 2017, was it appropriate for Democrats to object to the 2016 presidential election results?
Congressman, I think the things that are appropriate or inappropriate for Congress to do are that all members, of course, and all the rest of us have to adhere to the Constitution. And so I'm going to say that that's an issue for you as members of Congress to assess.
Well, you're former acting attorney general, and we appreciate your service to the country. I'm just asking, was it okay for them to? They've told us we're not allowed to object. We weren't allowed to object on January 6, 2021. In fact, you're not even allowed to co-sponsor legislation that Democrats introduced if you did object to accepting and counting the electors on January 6, 2021. I'm just wanting your thoughts on, was it okay for Democrats to do that on January 6, 2017?
What I would hope is people of all parties, all political perspectives, would respect the Constitution, our system of government, and the rule of law.
And does the Constitution allow members to object to the Electoral College results on January 6th after a presidential election?
My understanding is that it does.
It does, right. And Democrats did it. I mean, we had Jim McGovern, the Democrat chairman of the Rules Committee. He objected to the very first state called. He objected to Alabama back on January 6, 2017. President Trump won by 30 points. Mr. Raskin objected to Florida. Mrs. Waters objected to Wyoming, maybe the only state that President Trump won by more than he won Alabama. She objected to Wyoming. And you're saying that was okay for Democrats to do? Mr. Rosen, that was fine?
Oh, I'm sorry, Congress. I didn't understand if you were asking me to respond to that. Again, I mean, I think
is it okay for Jim McGovern, the Democrat member of Congress, to object to Alabama on January 6, 2017? Is that all right? He's allowed to do that, right?
I think if members are adhering to their constitutional rights and roles and responsibilities, that's, again, a question for all the folks in Congress.
And Ms. Waters can object to Wyoming, even though President Trump won Wyoming by like 40 points. She can object to that if she wants to, right?
Well, at least the Constitution allows members of Congress to raise objections.
Yeah. We've heard a lot of talk from the Democrats about revisionist history and the big lie. I just think it's important that we've had Democrat members of Congress tell us that we weren't allowed to object, that somehow we were trying to overturn the will of the American people, even though we objected to states like Pennsylvania, for example, where they, I believe in an unconstitutional fashion, changed their election laws in the run-up to the election, but somehow they're allowed to object to Alabama, they're allowed to object to Wyoming, they're allowed to object to Florida, but we're not allowed to object. I fail to see the logic there. How about the previous gentleman from Virginia talked about brutality, talked about statements. I just want to read you a couple statements here. Well, no, let me ask you this question first. Was the 2016 election stolen?
I do not know of evidence that would say it was. I think you're alluding to a troublesome thing about the legitimacy of our past elections, sometimes governor's races being called into question. And I think it's really necessary and important for all of us to find ways to restore our citizens' faith in the electoral process and in our representative system of government.
Secretary Clinton said on a speaking tour, May 2019, you can run the best campaign, you can even become the nominee, and you can have the election stolen from you. September 2019, she said on CBS Sunday Morning that President Trump was an illegitimate president. On October 2020, just a month before our last presidential election, she was referring to the 2016 presidential election, and she said it was stolen from her. Is she wrong?
She is wrong.
Yeah, she is wrong, because the election was valid in 2016. President Trump won. So when we talk about revisionist history that we've heard from the Democrats, when we talk about the big lie, their nominee, as recently as last October, was saying the election in 2016 was stolen.